What's your assessment of the current state of the Cavs?
Well, one of the things that we really benefited from was we were in a historically bad Eastern Conference. And all through those years, we really knew the target is the Western Conference team. There was nobody in the East who was really going to be in the way.
Yeah, right. The East was the LeBron Invitational for all of those years.
That now.
Avid Griffin may have just added a new layer to the debate surrounding LeBron James' legacy. The former Cleveland Cavaliers GM, who won a championship with LeBron, recently suggested that the Eastern Conference during those 8 straight finals runs wasn't as competitive as it appeared, even admitting the team didn't view the regular season as particularly challenging. While 8 consecutive finals appearances is a remarkable achievement, critics point out that LeBron faced only one All-NBA first-team player in the East during that span. Coming from someone who was part of the organization at the time, Griffin's comments are sure to reignite discussion about the level of competition during those years.
LeBron James is a fraud. LeBron James, once again, proves that he's a pat-standing clown and should never again ever be mentioned in the same breath as the greats who have ever played this great game that we call National Basketball Association basketball.
Do LeBron's 8 straight finals appearances still feel as impressive, knowing many believe the Eastern Conference was historically weak during that stretch? Or does that context change how you view the accomplishment? Does it highlight sustained greatness, or suggest the path may have been less demanding than it looked? Share your take below.
David Griffin was the general manager of the Cleveland Cavaliers throughout the whole stay, the second stint of LeBron James in Cleveland, when he came back from Miami up until the time that he left to the Lakers. Now, he's being asked about the current Cleveland Cavaliers team, and to acknowledge them and how great they are and all that other stuff. But during the answer to that question, he started talking about those years of the second stay of LeBron James and how lucky they were, because the Eastern Conference was probably the easiest Eastern Conference in the history of the NBA.
Let's start with exactly what David Griffin said, because this perspective comes from someone who worked directly with LeBron James. This isn't a critic with an agenda, it's the general manager who helped build the 2016 championship team in Cleveland. When Griffin talks about those finals runs, he's speaking from first-hand experience about what that era was really like. He explained, "One of the things we really benefited from was that we were in a historically bad Eastern Conference. All through those years, we knew the real challenge was going to be whoever came out of the Western Conference. There wasn't anyone in the East we truly felt would beat us." Read that again. The general manager is openly admitting that for 8 straight seasons, the Cavaliers entered the year believing no one in the Eastern Conference could beat them. Their real concern wasn't surviving the East, it was preparing for whoever emerged from the Western Conference, because that was viewed as the only true challenge. Griffin even went further, saying, "The East was the LeBron Invitational for all of those years." That's not a hot take from a commentator. That's LeBron's own GM describing the conference playoffs as a formality, suggesting Cleveland's path to the finals often felt like a foregone conclusion rather than a battle-tested journey.
I think what ended up happening ultimately along the way was it changed our perspective to such a degree that you saw us. Even the first year we were together, I think we were 19-20 in our first 39 games. And then we run off this historic run in the second half of the season. But guys weren't taking the season seriously.
But it doesn't stop there. Griffin went on to compare those LeBron-led teams to the current Cavaliers group built around Donovan Mitchell, saying, "What they are doing is going to be more impressive when they achieve what they are capable of. The Eastern Conference is significantly more competitive than what we had." That's a striking statement. The same GM who helped construct a championship roster around LeBron is suggesting that a finals run in today's East would carry more weight because the level of competition has risen. He even acknowledged that during those earlier years, some players didn't take the regular season seriously, pointing out that one season the team started 19-20 through 39 games because the urgency simply wasn't there. From his perspective, the confidence came from knowing the real test would arrive in June, not during the grind of the regular season, reinforcing the idea that the path through the East often felt predictable rather than perilous.
A violation. So they'll do it again.
You know, in those plays, and that was on LeBron James, those plays often go unnoticed. He makes this shot, you know, people will forget about it. These are the type of plays in this tight of series that can make the difference between winning or losing.
Let's look at the numbers that critics often bring up. During those 8 straight finals runs, LeBron faced just one All-NBA first-team player from the Eastern Conference in the playoffs, a stat frequently cited to argue that the top-end competition in the East was thin during that stretch. There were also seasons that, in hindsight, highlight the conference's depth questions. The 2014-15 Atlanta Hawks, for example, produced 4 All-Stars, including Kyle Korver, a 34-year-old elite shooter whose selection symbolized how different the talent landscape looked compared to the West. Pau Gasol was voted an All-Star starter while with the Chicago Bulls, a detail many fans barely remember today. To critics, those examples reflect a diluted era in the East, where aging stars and system players often filled marquee spots, reinforcing the argument that LeBron's road to the finals, while historic inconsistency, may not have featured the same level of elite opposition seen in other eras.
There was no part of me that believed we were losing. And it was one of those things that I just believed to the core of me, but it was because I felt like the only way we could win was to dig the hole we dug. That group needed it to be like that.
That's wild, isn't it?
For whatever reason, they were so spoiled by success and needed it to be so damn difficult. They put themselves in a position that only they could overcome. But that was the greatness of that group. They lived for make it messy.
Critics also point to the All-Star games during that era as another example of the imbalance. The Western Conference frequently outmatched the East, and the talent gap was noticeable to fans and analysts alike. The games often felt lopsided, reinforcing the perception that the West was loaded with elite superstars while the East lacked comparable depth. Eventually, the NBA scrapped the traditional East versus West format in favor of the draft-style Team LeBron versus Team Curry setup, a move many viewed as a response to declining competitiveness. To some, that shift symbolized just how wide the perceived gap between the conferences had become during those years.
What Ty Lue did at halftime to challenge LeBron, there's going to be a 30 for 30 on that moment and what it really did to LeBron. He was the best of his angels that second half in a way that he couldn't have been without Ty Lue. And Ty knew it. And to have the gift he had at that moment for handling that situation. And then for our locker room to deal with Ty Lue going at him the way they did and to redirect LeBron to get the benefit out of it, that's a James Jones thing. That's a Channing Frye thing. That's an RJ thing. That's a J.R. Smith thing. That's a, look, man, is he right?
Let's put that stretch into historical context. Michael Jordan defeated 20 different 50-win teams over the course of his playoff career. Kobe Bryant holds the record with 26, and is the only player ever to beat 4 50-win teams in a single championship run. By comparison, critics point out that LeBron James has played more NBA seasons than the total number of 50-win teams he has eliminated in the playoffs. He has never faced 4 50-win teams in one postseason, largely, they argue, because the Eastern Conference during much of his finals streak rarely produced that many high-win opponents. In some of those years, the East had only 2 or 3 50-win teams, while in the Western Conference, 50 wins was often the baseline just to secure a playoff spot. To detractors, that contrast underscores how wide the perceived gap between the conferences was during that era and why the path to the finals looked dramatically different depending on which side of the bracket a team played on. Griffin's comments essentially confirm what critics have argued for years. LeBron often faced the path of least resistance. He joined Miami when the Eastern Conference was weak, and when that experiment ended, he returned to Cleveland knowing the East still offered a relatively smooth road to the finals. For years, he could essentially coast through 3 playoff rounds before meeting a true challenge in June. The numbers back this up. LeBron's playoff stats in the Eastern Conference were noticeably stronger than his finals performances against top-tier Western Conference teams. The competition he faced in the East underscores this point: a Derrick Rose coming off major knee injuries, or an Indiana Pacers team led by Paul George with few supporting stars, made for matchups that were far easier than the gauntlet of contenders in the West. Then there's the rest of the Eastern Conference, which did little to challenge LeBron's dominance. Teams like the Toronto Raptors, notorious for playoff collapses, or the Boston Celtics with their aging core, weren't genuine championship threats, just solid regular season squads that fell apart against superstar competition. Griffin even recalled a year when Toronto managed to beat them, and he credited it more to the city, the crowd energy, than the team or coaching. That illustrates just how weak the opposition often was. In many seasons, even the second-best team in the East became a punchline, routinely swept or gentleman swept by LeBron. For years, the Eastern Conference playoffs were anything but competitive. It was essentially a formality. Everyone knew LeBron was going to the finals. The only real question was how many games his opponent could win. This context shifts how we should interpret his finals record. Yes, he made 8 straight appearances, but he went just 3-5 in those series against true Western Conference contenders. When facing teams that had battled a competitive gauntlet to get there, LeBron often came up short. Compare that to Michael Jordan, who navigated a far tougher era and went 6-0 in the finals, or Kobe Bryant, who faced multiple 50-win teams each playoff run and still claimed 5 championships. The path LeBron took was objectively easier, and the finals record reflects the challenge of facing real competition. Griffin also revealed another telling detail in past interviews. He described working with LeBron as overwhelming due to the constant pressure to win immediately, forcing him to trade future assets and overpay players just to satisfy short-term expectations. That pressure was a key reason Griffin considered leaving, even after winning the championship. A glimpse into the extraordinary demands and intensity surrounding LeBron's era in Cleveland. The GM who built a championship team was so drained and frustrated by the experience that he wanted out.